Great. Good afternoon. So my name is Virginia Acha, and I really appreciated Chris's introduction to our talk today because it gives the broader perspectives that I hope we can get to in the debate. For my contribution today, I wanted to give a perspective of one part of the healthcare system, which is the role of medicines in public procurement. As a pharmaceutical company, that's obviously our interest, and of course, you'll be interested in the debate. We can extend it maybe wider, but to begin with medicines, an important part is to think about when we're looking at procurement terms, are they fit for purpose? So how does procurement actually deliver the very things that we're trying to make available, to purchase, to buy? And in fact, what I wanted to begin with this talk is to just really situate what is it particularly about medicines that we need to think about when we're considering procurement mechanisms. And later my colleague from Merck Serono will talk a little bit more in detail about the Public Procurement Directive. So I'm going to begin with a sort of, again, as Chris did, a broad brush. I'm going to begin broad brush with medicines. And, you know, the first point to mention is that although it's only one part of the healthcare budget, it's a stable part and it's an important one. So this is why when we make changes or think about how we want to do procurement, the key thing is to do this thoughtfully to understand how this is going to really advance delivery of medicines to the people who need them, and in a way that doesn't somehow get in the way of getting those healthcare savings and achievements that we're all also looking for. And of course, within that process, one important method for procurement is tendering. And I'd just like to mention that it is a growing procurement method for medicines, and that has an important role to play. But there are also other methods that are still used in procurement, and we'll talk a little bit about that. As we move into procurement terms, there are some things we really need to be mindful about when we're selecting how we do it. So the first thing is to understand what it is about medicines that would shape those procurement needs. And I've just put them in brief up on the slide, and we will certainly spend a little more time on them, but just to, in brief, mention that not all medicines are interchangeable, and I'll explain why that's important in a tendering process or in any procurement process, and that's particularly true for biologic medicines. Of course, there's also the need to be aware that medicines will also be at the discretion of a prescriber, and the reason why they need choice is that patients will respond differently, so physicians need to have that full cabinet to make sure that they're getting the right treatment to the right patient. That's quite a specific and personal decision that the physician and patient relationship needs to maintain. And then when we're looking at procurement terms, again, it matters on how you're calculating it and what you're looking at, and I'm sure this will be also something that will be consistent with the other sectors that are going to be discussing the issues today. This isn't specific to healthcare, but you need to understand what you've included in your review. So understanding that the treatment is more than the dose, that the supply is really more than the carton, and that the value is more than the price. So how do we capture all these wider issues that we need to consider? And then finally, as we do with any procurement system, and leading to the sort of industrial policy points that Chris mentioned, procurement terms are always really important signals for investment, and it's really important that the return on investment maintains a critical signal to encourage development of future medicines, so that we do have that continued innovative cycle, which we've been fortunate to have all these decades. So, and finally then, you know, and this is the end of the preview for you for the talk, but the need for negotiation engagement really will help us get to a better place where we can deliver the valued terms for healthcare in procurement. So just to begin again, maybe hopefully a little bit more evidence and a little more detail for you. The question is, you know, how are medicines normally purchased? Well, on the previous page. The medicines bill that you see up there is a sort of a little quick snapshot. This is looking at the future of spending through 2016 that IMS has done for the 5 of the largest European markets. And as the headline says, European spending growth, oops, and you can't see it very well, or can you? Hope you can. European spending growth will be flat. So looking at that bar graph, what does that tell you? It's explaining two different procedures. So first of all, we have a patent dividend that is delivering savings throughout this decade. So one estimate, again, from this IMS work is that you're going to have 127 billion worth of savings that will come through a loss of expiry outcome. That's considerable savings. So as new medicines come into the market, you have this patent dividend that will help keep that medicines bill, as you can see on the graph, stable and well below inflation rates. The other reason why is that you've got good efficiencies occurring within healthcare systems and within use of treatments as they improve. So the overall medicines bill within the OECD was in 2010, the average I believe was 16.4% as a measure of total healthcare spending. But that reflected quite a wide range, and at one of the lower ends of the range was within the UK, and the estimates now for 2011 is that in fact that was 9.6 of the UK National Health Service spend, and it was expected to stay at that level. So we're looking at it's an important spend, no doubt about it, but it's a stable spend. So there's no medicines bill crisis, as some people have argued. And in which case, then, when you're thinking about making changes to tendering or procurement terms, what is the role for tendering? In fact, medicines are purchased through a number of routes. They're purchased centrally by procurement agencies or insurance funds, by regional procurement groups, or individually by hospitals. So it's a whole range. There's different levels of buyers, and they use they do a full range of procurement methods, which of course includes tendering. What makes tendering different with medicines is that by the nature of a tender, it really requires that they have an upfront specification on a short list of criteria, that they're comparing like with like. So I can look at option A, B, or C, and they should all be delivering the same. They should be comparable to be able to compare across on those different criteria. And there should hopefully be more than one source of supply so that you get some sort of competitive dynamic. And that's the figure down at the bottom is from some work that Booz and Company have been doing with Pfizer, where they estimated that the markets for pharmaceuticals includes now about 24% of purchases via tenders. And that's up from just 21% in 2009. So it's a steady growth. It's growing because of various reasons. It's an approach that some people prefer to use, particularly with off-patent medicines, and that is a feature that's getting more widely used. The picture at the bottom gives you that in a sort of visual form, where the red box is your tendered value, and this was the figure in 2009. The big blue value, though, are direct orders. So we're still talking, it's a smaller share of the total. It's still not the dominant means of procuring medicines, but it is a growing and important one, which is why we wanted to talk about procurement methods in this sort today. So why should we be cautious or careful about how we're procuring medicines? What should we be mindful of? First of all, that medicines are complex, and I know that sounds absolutely facile to you, but it's true. So it can be that they're complex in their structure, particularly if you can imagine a biologic medicine where it gets very, very complicated very quickly, or it could be in terms of the way it's applied. So there are some even small molecule medicines or your typical pill-type medicines, which by the virtue of what they do, they can have quite a specific impact on the patient. And in that respect, we need to look at the therapeutic response in patients. So not only are they different between each other, but they will have possibly a different outcome depending on the patient. You all have, I'm sure, an understanding of that for yourselves. Some medicines will work well in one patient, another medicine will work better in another patient, and we can't always predict that ahead of time. That's very difficult to do. So at the minute, it's being cautious of how that complexity works in therapeutic treatment. And that's particularly so, again, for biologics because of the complex nature of those particular medicines. In that respect, then, it becomes difficult to establish like with like. So small molecule medicines allow for the most complete characterization because I can fully specify them on a chemical basis, and I can work out their excipient structure, and I can really define that. So if I'm setting out a tender, I can do that, especially if they're off patent, then there's more than one source of supply. There are exceptions to that, particularly the anti-epileptic drugs, where that's not necessarily the case. But in the large molecules, that's much more difficult to characterize. The structures are highly complex, and as yet, it's not possible to establish interchangeability, which means that I could swap between the two medicines with you without any risk to your safety or the efficacy of that treatment. We don't have the science to justify that yet. So with that, in that circumstance, then we really do advocate that any interchangeability terms, so when a doctor decides to move you from one medicine to another, that really needs to be done with that, the right science background and the physician supervision. Something that's harder to do when it's a procurement structure that selects for you. And so moreover, you could see on that point, then my conclusion would be you don't want automatic substitution where you don't have interchangeable medicines. So you don't want a choice to be made by somebody else and then applied to all patients regardless of their prescriber's choice. So this is the important part about understanding like with like. If you can't establish like with like, it's difficult to set up a tender to control for all those things. It's difficult, but it does at least mean that you need to, if you do it, you need to make sure there are alternatives available to allow for that kind of variation so a prescriber can make the alteration of prescription as needed. And then finally, you need to have, for medicines, effective monitoring. So it's not a once and for all thing. Once you purchase the medicine, what really matters is how it's working in the patient. And unfortunately, there's always the potential for adverse events that happen afterwards. You need to be able to have an effective system that monitors and tracks these medicines so that when should anything happen, we can identify it and rectify the situation as quickly as possible. And actually, under the Pharmacovigilance Directive, which is one of these other directives that have been revised, it's required for biologics. All new biologics will have to be identified by their INN and name in the whole treatment pathway at any point in time because of this imperative to have that effective monitoring. So again, this challenges the way you want to structure your procurement terms to allow for these things, to make sure that at the very heart of this, we're protecting the efficacy and safety of treatments for patients.